Howdy, folks. Welcome back to the Gotham Report, where we break down the world's hottest military showdowns. Today, we're diving headfirst into the simmering standoff between Iran and Israel. In the world of geopolitics, they're practically nose to nose. The Middle East is more like a pressure cooker, with decades of history, religion, and politics all bubbling away. Right smack dab in the middle of this pressure cooker, you got Iran and Israel, two heavyweights with a whole lot of history and even more suspicion. High stakes in the sky. Why air power matters. In this standoff, air power is the main event. Controlling the skies is everything. Projecting power, sending a message, and keeping the other guy guessing. Israel's air force is known for precision strikes and technological edge. Iran has been quietly building up their air defenses, turning their airspace into a no-fly zone for anyone foolish enough to test them. A shield in the sand. Iran's air defense strategy. Iran's air defense strategy isn't about winning dogfights. It's about making the skies over Iran a death trap. They've learned from years of sanctions and embargoes, getting crafty with a layered defense system. Long-range missiles, medium-range SAMs, and short-range systems create a multi-tiered cake of doom. They've invested heavily in electronic warfare and radar jamming to confuse and disorient enemy pilots. Even if you find your target in Iranian airspace, you ain't coming back in one piece. Foreign Guardians imported systems bolstering Iran's defenses. Iran has pieced together a hodgepodge of systems from all over the globe. Soviet-era SAMs, Chinese knockoffs, and Russian tech like the S-400 system. They're not just buying these systems, they're modifying and reverse engineering them. It's working, making their defenses faster, meaner, and more dangerous. Domestic deterrence innovations from Iran's military-industrial complex. Iran's military-industrial complex churns out homegrown weapons systems. The Bavar-373 missile system is their answer to the Russian S-300. The Khordad-15, their version of the American Patriot missile, can hit targets over 75 miles away. These systems are rough around the edges, but dangerous. Decades of sanctions have taught them to improvise and make do with what they got. Layered defenses, creating a multifaceted shield. Iran's defense network is like a fortress with multiple layers designed to slow down and inflict casualties on the enemy. They want to create so many layers of danger that any attacker would think twice before messing with Iran. They're turning the entire country into one giant no-fly zone. Reverse engineering and innovation, the cornerstones of Iranian defense. Iran is a master of reverse engineering, turning old Soviet and Chinese weapons into new threats. They're not just copycats, they're innovators too. Their engineers and scientists are developing homegrown technologies to rival the West. They're focusing on missile defense and electronic warfare to make life difficult for the enemy. If they can make life difficult enough, they might just keep the wolves at bay. The Rod family, from short-range defense to long-range interdiction. The Rod family of missile systems showcases Iran's homegrown ingenuity. The Rod-1 is a short-range, shoulder-fired missile. The Rod-2 is a bigger, badder version with longer range and versatility. The Rod-500 has a range of over 300 miles and stealth technology. Iran's missile systems are evolving to meet new threats. Bavar-373, Iran's answer to the S-300. Iran built the Bavar-373 after failing to acquire the Russian S-300. This system is packed with advanced radar, electronic countermeasures, and missiles. It's designed to turn any incoming threat into a fiery ball of scrap metal. Whether it lives up to the hype is another story. Khordad, a homegrown threat to advanced aircraft. The Khordad family of missiles, especially the Khordad-3, targets low-flying and high-altitude threats. It can track and engage multiple targets even in heavy electronic jamming environments. Iran claims it can take on stealth jets like the F-35. Whether they can back up those claims is a story for another day. A history of proxies and covert operations. Iran and Israel have been circling each other for decades, engaging in proxy warfare. Iran backs groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and Shia militias. Israel uses intelligence services like Mossad for covert operations. This shadow war involves assassination, sabotage, and stirring up trouble. Both sides test each other's defenses without starting a full-blown war. Tit-for-tat escalating retaliation and the risk of miscalculation. The shadow war sometimes spills into the open, leading to escalating retaliation. Israel carries out airstrikes in Syria. Iran launches rockets in response. The tanker war in the Persian Gulf raised tensions, worrying about World War III. In Gaza, Hamas launches rockets, Israel responds with airstrikes, and civilians suffer. It's a never-ending cycle of violence with no end in sight. Gaza, a testing ground for Iranian-made weapons. Some believe Iran uses Gaza to test new weapon systems. Hamas gets advanced rockets and missiles from Iran. Israel analyzes these weapons to figure out how to defeat them and where they came from. Strategic calculations. What's at stake for Iran and Israel? This conflict is about more than land or religion. It's about survival. Iran wants to break out of Western-imposed sanctions and become a regional power. Israel seeks security, seeing Iran's nuclear ambitions as an existential threat. Both sides view each other as obstacles to their goals. The ticking clock, toward open conflict or a negotiated peace. Will this conflict erupt into a full-blown regional war or lead to a negotiated peace? Only time will tell. Now, you can't talk about this whole Iran-Israel showdown without bringing up the big dog in the room, the good old US of A. See, America, they're like that well-meaning but kind of clueless uncle who always shows up to the family reunion with a plate of potato salad and ends up causing a whole mess of drama. They've been trying to play peacemaker in the Middle East for decades, but it's like trying to herd cats. They've got strong ties to both sides, see? Israel, they're like America's little brother, always getting into trouble but always able to count on Big Bro to bail them out. But then you got those pesky oil fields in the Persian Gulf, and suddenly America's got to be nice to the Saudis, who just so happen to be Iran's biggest rivals. It's a real geopolitical juggling act, and let's just say Uncle Sam ain't exactly known for his grace. Now America's involvement in this whole mess, it goes way back. They were instrumental in helping Israel become a regional power, supplying them with weapons, money, and that all-important diplomatic cover at the UN. But then they went and toppled Saddam Hussein in Iraq, which kind of backfired on him, to put it mildly. See, Saddam, he was keeping Iran in check, but once he was out of the picture, Iran's influence in the region started growing like kudzu on a hot summer day. And that's got the Americans all kinds of nervous. They don't want Iran to get too powerful, but they also don't want another war in the Middle East. So they're stuck between a rock and a hard place, trying to figure out how to contain Iran without starting World War III. Now, while America's busy trying to figure out which end is up, there's another player moving and grooving in the shadows. Those wily Russians. See, Russia? They've been cozying up to Iran for years, seeing an opportunity to stick it to the Americans and expand their own influence in the region. They've been supplying Iran with weapons, providing them with diplomatic support, and generally making life difficult for the West. They even teamed up with Iran and those Syrian fellas to prop up Bashar al-Assad in that whole Syrian civil war mess. Now, Russia's interest in the region, it ain't exactly a secret. They want access to those warm water ports in the Mediterranean. They want to control the flow of oil and gas out of the Persian Gulf. And most importantly, they want to show the world that they're still a force to be reckoned with. And Iran, well, they're happy to have a powerful friend like Russia in their corner. They know they can't take on the Americans alone, but with Russia backing them up, they feel a whole lot braver about thumbing their noses at the West. Now this whole Russia-Iran bromance, it's got the Americans sweating bullets. They're used to being the big dog in the Middle East, but now they've got competition and it ain't pretty. It's like watching two grizzly bears circling each other in the woods and you just know something bad's about to go down. America's always claiming to be a peacemaker, but let's be real. They're looking out for their own interests. Their politics are dominated by money from donors like AIPAC, and that's why they're so keen on looking out for Israel. It's all about the money and influence, not peace. Now Iran, they've been pouring a whole lot of concrete and sweat into this whole fortress strategy, turning their country into one giant keep-out sign for any aircraft foolish enough to trespass. But here's the million-dollar question. Is this strategy going to work? Will it actually deter Israel or the US from launching airstrikes if they feel like it? Well, that's the million-dollar question, ain't it? And like most things in the Middle East, the answer ain't exactly as clear as a glass of sweet tea on a hot summer day. On the one hand, you gotta admire their gumption. They've taken a page out of the old Cold War playbook, trying to create a credible threat that'll make any attacker think twice before tangling with them. They're essentially saying, come and get us, but be prepared to pay a hefty price. And you know what? It just might work. This ain't Iraq or Afghanistan we're talking about, folks. Iran's got a much larger and more sophisticated military, and they've got home field advantage. Now, on the other hand, there's always the risk that this whole fortress strategy could backfire on them. See, the more Iran builds up its defenses, the more paranoid they're going to get. They're going to be looking over their shoulders, seeing shadows where there ain't none, just waiting for someone to make a move. And when you're that jumpy, well, accidents can happen. And let's not forget about the economic cost of all this military buildup. Iran's economy, it ain't exactly a well-oiled machine as it is, thanks to those pesky sanctions. All that money they're spending on missiles and radar systems, well, that's money they ain't spending on schools, hospitals, or, just basic necessities for their people. And here's another thing to chew on. Even if Iran's defenses do manage to deter a full-scale invasion, they ain't gonna stop those pesky covert operations. Israel, they've got a long history of quiet assassination, sabotage, and cyber attacks. They're like the ninjas of the Middle East, always lurking in the shadows, ready to strike when you least expect it. So even if Iran manages to turn their airspace into a no-fly zone, they're still gonna have to worry about those invisible threats, those whispers in the night that can bring down a government just as effectively as any bomb. So, what's the verdict? Is Iran's fortress strategy a recipe for deterrence or disaster? Well, folks, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but it's probably a little bit of both. They might be able to make life difficult for any attacker, but they're also painting a big old target on their backs. And in a region as volatile as the Middle East, well, that's a dangerous game to play. Now this whole Iran-Israel standoff, it ain't just some regional squabble, folks. This here's a global issue with implications for peace and stability all over the world. See, the Middle East, it's like the crossroads of the world. You got those oil fields that everyone's always fighting over. You got those trade routes that connect east and west, and you got those religious tensions that have been simmering for centuries. And when things start heating up in the Middle East, well, the whole darn world feels the heat. Now, one of the biggest concerns is the risk of a wider war. If Iran and Israel ever come to blows directly, well, it ain't gonna be pretty. Both sides, they've got some powerful friends in their corners. And it wouldn't take much for those friends to get dragged into the fight. And before you know it, you're looking at a full-blown regional conflict with the US, Russia, China, and everybody else picking sides and flexing their military muscles. And let's not forget about those nuclear weapons. Iran, they've been making noises about developing their own nukes, and Israel, well, everybody knows they've already got a few tucked away in their back pocket. And here's another thing to worry about, the impact on the global economy. The Middle East, it's the energy center of the world. If those oil fields were to go offline, well, say goodbye to those cheap gas prices, folks. We'd be looking at another energy crisis with recessions, inflation, and all sorts of economic headaches. And it ain't just about oil either. The Middle East, it's a major hub for global trade. If those shipping lanes were to get disrupted, well, it would throw the entire global supply chain into chaos. So what can be done to prevent this whole thing from blowing up in our faces? Well, folks, if I had the answer to that, I'd be wearing a suit and tie instead of this here bolo tie. But one thing's for sure, we need to find a way to de-escalate the situation to bring both sides back from the brink. And that's gonna take some serious diplomacy, some tough compromises, and a whole lot of luck. Because if we don't find a way to make peace with each other, well, we're all gonna pay the price.